maple syrup, and being polite. I'm Valerie, host of Canadian Creepies, the podcast that digs up stories polite history would rather forget. Cold cases that never found justice, haunted places that refuse to stay quiet, and folklore with a dark side you've probably never heard. If true crime, paranormal mysteries, and unsettling Canadian history are your thing, you'll want to tune in. New episodes every week wherever you get your podcasts. Canadian Creepies, exploring and exposing the shadows of the true north.
There are those who walk among us, cloaked in the ordinary, wearing a name that isn't theirs. How many lives are quietly rewritten in hotel registries, boarding passes, and hushed introductions? In a city that is filled with bright lights and buried secrets, some people leave behind questions, like cigarette smoke in a forgotten lobby. You think you recognize a stranger. You think you understand routine. Often, what we see is just a mask, and what lies beneath is a story that was never intended for us.
Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path.
A man checked in alone. No luggage. No identification beyond a name. He requested an interior room high above the street, the kind that offered no view, no escape. Room 1048. The clerk handed him the key, unaware that he'd just opened a door that would baffle investigators and leave more questions than answers for decades. To this day, what happened in room 1048 remains tangled in uncertainty. The hotel itself still stands, a relic of Jazz Age opulence, with its ornate brass and Art Deco elegance. But that one room has never shaken the weight of its mystery. Who was the man who checked in? Who came to visit him? And what message was left, scrawled not in ink but in silence? This episode begins with a door that no one saw close, and a crime that no one saw coming. In the early 1930s, Kansas City was a city of contradictions. Gritty and glamorous, booming and broken. The Great Depression had cast a long shadow, yet the streets still pulsed with jazz, bootleg liquor, and a kind of defiance elegance. Neon signs flickered above speakeasies and supper clubs, while the scent of cigarettes and perfume lingered in hotel lobbies where fortunes were made and lost overnight. It was a place where the powerful mingled with the desperate, and where anonymity could be bought with a room key and a quiet nod. The Presidential Hotel stood tall among its peers, a beacon of Art Deco sophistication. Its brass fixtures gleamed beneath chandeliers, and its elevators carried guests to rooms lined with velvet drapes and polished wood. The clientele ranged from traveling businessmen to out-of-town dignitaries, to jazz musicians, and women in fur-trimmed coats who never gave their real names. It was the kind of place where secrets were currency, and discretion was part of the service. This was Kansas City at its most enigmatic, a city where the music never stopped, but the truth often did, and somewhere within that glittering facade, behind one locked door, something happened that no amount of champagne or charm could explain away. The story of room 1048 doesn't just belong to the man who checked in. It belongs to the city that let him disappear. On the afternoon of January 2nd, 1935, at approximately 1:20 p.m., a man entered the lobby of the Hotel President in downtown Kansas City. He approached the front desk, signed the register under the name Roland T. Owen. He requested a single room on an upper floor, specifically one that faced the interior courtyard rather than the street. The clerk assigned him to room 1046. Owen had no luggage with him, only a few personal items tucked into the pockets of his overcoat. A comb, a toothbrush, and a hairbrush. He wore a black overcoat and was described by staff as well-dressed, neat, and polite, although his demeanor was quiet and somewhat distant. Bellhop Randall Profts escorted Owen to his room. During the elevator ride, Owen commented on the high price of a nearby hotel, suggesting he had recently visited or at least inquired there before choosing the president. Once inside room 1046, Owen removed his coat and began unpacking the few items he carried. Prost noted that Owen did not appear to have any bags or suitcases. His physical appearance stood out. He was estimated to be between 20 and 35 years old, with brown hair and a noticeable scar above his left ear. He also had a cauliflower ear, a condition often associated with boxing or wrestling. These features made him memorable to the hotel staff, though at the time, no one suspected anything unusual beyond his lack of luggage. The maid, Mary Sopik, would later recall her first interactions with Owen that same day. When she arrived to clean the room around noon, the door was locked from the inside. Owen opened it and allowed her to enter. The room was dimly lit with the shades drawn and only a small lamp turned on. He asked her not to lock the door when she finished, explaining that he was expecting a visitor. Sopik found his request odd but not alarming. She would later return with fresh towels and found the room unlocked, Owen lying fully clothed on the bed, seemingly asleep. A handwritten note beside the table read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." The staff took the note of his unusual habits, but in a hotel accustomed to discretion and transient guests, no one raised an alarm. On the morning of January 3rd, it began like any other visit with the maid, Mary Sopik, around 10:30 a.m. She approached room 1046 expecting it to be empty, as the door was locked from the outside. Using her master key, she entered and was startled to find Roland T. Owen sitting in the dark, fully dressed, in an armchair near the window. The shades were drawn tightly this time, and the only light came from the same dim lamp as the day before. He appeared tense, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Sopik hesitated, but Owen told her that she could proceed with her cleaning. As she worked, the phone rang. Owen answered and spoke in a low voice. He said, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry." And then he hung up without further explanation. Later that same day, Sopik returned with fresh towels. The door was again locked from the outside, suggesting Owen had left. But when she entered, he was inside once again, sitting silently in the dark. She noticed a deepened unease in his demeanor. He seemed agitated, distracted. She would later tell police that he looked as though he were afraid of something or someone. He asked her again not to lock the door when she left, saying that he was expecting a visitor. Throughout the day, staff reported seeing Owen leaving and returning the hotel multiple times. What stuck to them was that he did so without a coat, despite the bitter January cold. Kansas City was in the grip of winter, and his lack of outerwear was both unusual and concerning. He never carried a suitcase or a bag, and he never stayed out for long. Later that day, Randolph Probst, the bellhop, remembers being summoned to room 1046 that afternoon to deliver towels and ice. When he arrived, he heard two male voices inside. Owen opened the door just enough to take the items, and Probst caught a glimpse of the other man seated in the room. Owen's face was tense, and he spoke quickly, as if trying to end the interaction as quickly as possible. Other staff members reported seeing a woman entering the hotel that evening. She was described as young with dark hair and dressed in a stylish coat. She asked for room 1046, but was told she would need to call up first. She used the lobby phone, spoke briefly, and then left without going upstairs. Her identity was never confirmed. The name Dawn continued to surface. Owen mentioned him to the maid, and the phone call seemed to involve him, but no one at the hotel ever saw or spoke to a man named Dawn. The staff began to feel that something was off, although no one could quite put their finger on it. Owen's behavior was strange, but not overtly alarming. In a hotel accustomed to discretion, guests came and went with secrets, and the staff knew better than to pry. At 7 a.m. on January 4th, the switchboard operator at the hotel president noticed that the phone in room 1046 was off the hook. A white light on the board indicated that the line was open, but no one was speaking. The operator waited, assuming that the guest would hang up. By 8:30, the phone was still off the hook. A bellboy named Harold Pike was sent to investigate. He used the master key to enter the room, which was dark with the shades drawn. The hallway light revealed a man laying naked on the bed, surrounded by a large dark stain. The phone had been knocked off the stand. Pike replaced it on the receiver and left, assuming that the man was intoxicated. At 11:03 a.m., the phone was off the hook again. This time, bellboy Randolph Probst was dispatched. He knocked several times. A low, unfamiliar voice responded from inside, saying, "Come in. Turn on the lights." Probst tried the door, but it was locked from the inside. He informed the guest through the door that the phone was off the hook. Receiving no further response, he returned to the lobby. Concerned, the hotel staff contacted management, and Probst was sent back to the room. He used the master key to enter, and inside he found Roland T. Owens on his knees and elbows, about 2 feet from the door, holding his head in his hands. Blood was visible on his head. Probst turned on the lights and saw that there was blood everywhere on the walls, the bed, and in the bathroom. He immediately left and notified the manager. Police returned shortly after. Owens was found with a thin white cord wrapped around his neck, wrists, and ankles. His hands and feet were bound with amateur knots. He had been severely beaten, his skull was fractured, and he had stab wounds in his chest above the heart. There were bruises on his neck, and blood pooled on the floor. In the bathroom, both drinking glasses had shattered in the sink. Blood and broken glass were scattered across the tiles. Owen appeared to have tried to reach the sink, but the binds restricted his movement. Despite the severity of his condition, Owen was still breathing when police entered room 1046. He was conscious enough to respond when they asked who had inflicted the injuries. His answer was brief and puzzling. Nobody. Officers pressured him further, asking how he had sustained the wounds, and Owens claimed that he had fallen against the bathtub. The explanation did not match the scene. His wrists and ankles were bound with a white cord, his neck bore signs of strangulation, and his body was covered in bruises and stab wounds. Blood was scattered across the walls and pooled on the floor. The bathroom sink was filled with shattered glass. Shortly after giving his statement, Owen collapsed. He was rushed to Kansas City General Hospital, where doctors assessed his injuries. They found a fractured skull, scab wounds to the chest, and extensive bruising. The binding had cut into his skin. The trauma had suggested prolonged abuse. The medical staff estimated the injuries had been inflicted 6 to 7 hours before he was discovered, placing the attack somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m. Owen never regained consciousness. He died just after midnight on January 5th. Police began their investigation of room 1046 immediately after Owen was taken to the hospital. The scene was chaotic. Blood was found on the walls, ceiling, the bed liners, and pooled on the floor. The bathroom sink contained shattered glass from 2 drinking tumblers. There were no clothes in the room, and no weapon was found. The few items Owen had brought with him, his comb, toothbrush, and hairbrush, were missing. Investigators recovered a few odd objects at the scene as well: a hairpin, an unused towel, a safety razor, and a bottle of diluted sulfuric acid. The presence of the acid raised questions, though it was unclear whether it had any connection to the injuries. Fingerprints were lifted from the telephone stand, but they didn't match Owen's, and a cigarette butt was found near the end of the bed, although no one had seen Owen smoke during his stay. The cord used to bind him was ordinary white cotton, tied in crude knots. Detectives believe the attack had occurred hours before Owen was discovered, and the lack of a murder weapon suggested that someone had left the room after the assault. This is where hotel guests began to come forward. A woman staying in room 1048, next door to Owen, reported hearing loud voices and a possible scuffle during the night. She said it sounded like a man and a woman arguing. Another guest claimed to have heard a strange gurgling noise around 2 a.m., followed by silence. These accounts have added to the growing sense that something violent had occurred long before the bellboy entered the room that morning. As police traced the name Roland T. Owen, they quickly discovered it was false. The address that he had given at check-in had led to a vacant lot in Los Angeles. No records matched the name, and no one came forward to claim the body. The investigation widened, and detectives began to suspect that Owen had been involved in something far more complex than a random act of violence. They revisited every detail, including a strange encounter reported by city worker Robert Lane. On the night of January 2nd, Robert Lane, a city worker, was driving along 12th Street in Kansas City when he noticed a man walking alone in the cold. The man was dressed in only a shirt and trousers, clearly underdressed for the freezing weather. Lane slowed, and On the night of January 2nd, Robert Lane was driving along 12th Street in Kansas City when he noticed a man walking alone in the cold. The man was dressed in only a shirt and trousers, clearly underdressed for the freezing weather. Lane slowed down and the man walked over. He asked if Lane was a taxi. Lane said no, but offered him a ride anyways. The man climbed into the car without hesitation, and Lane immediately noticed that his right hand was injured. It was wrapped in a cloth and blood had soaked through. Lane asked about the injury, and the man's response was a strange remark. He said, "I'll have to kill that man tomorrow." His tone was bitter and he seemed agitated. Lane found the comment unsettling, but didn't press further. As they drove, the man gave vague directions and eventually asked to be dropped off near the hotel president. Lane pulled over at the requested intersection, and the man exited quickly without saying much else. He didn't thank Lane or offer an explanation, and Lane watched him walk towards the hotel without a coat, and then drove off. Days later, after reading about the mysterious death of the man in room 1046, Lane saw a photograph in the newspaper and recognized the face. It was the same man he had picked up that night. The hand injury, the cryptic threat, the destination all matched. Lane contacted the police and gave a full account of the encounter. His statement added another layer to the growing mystery surrounding the man who had checked into the hotel under the name of Roland T. Owens. For over a year, the man who was known only as Roland T. Owen remained unidentified. His body had been buried in Kansas City after an anonymous donor paid for the funeral and sent a bouquet of roses with a card signed, "Love Forever, Louise." Detectives had exhausted leads tied to the alias. The Los Angeles address he gave at check-in didn't exist, and no one matching his description had been reported missing. His fingerprints also yielded no match, and so the case stalled. Then, In late 1936, a break came unexpectedly. A woman in Birmingham, Alabama, was reading a magazine article about the mysterious death of a man in Kansas City hotel. The article included a photograph of the victim and mentioned a distinctive scar above his left ear. She recognized the face immediately. It was her son. She contacted authorities and provided details that matched the man buried under the name of Roland T. Owen. Investigators compared the scar, the physical features, and timeline. Everything aligned. Artemis Ogletree was born in Florida in 1915, the youngest of 3 children. His parents, Leon and Ruby Ogletree, had 2 other children, Eleanor, born in 1913, and Leon Jr., born in 1914. During his early childhood, Artemis had suffered an accident involving hot grease that left a permanent scar above his left ear. The area never grew hair again, a detail that would later prove crucial in identifying him. The Ogletree family moved frequently throughout the southeastern United States. After leaving Florida, they lived in New Orleans and Augusta before settling in Birmingham, Alabama. Artemis spent his teenage years there. He was quiet, introspective, and often absorbed in books. He had a vivid imagination and a fascination with travel. When the family lived in New Orleans, he would spend hours in wharves watching the ships come and go, wondering where they were headed. In 1934, at the age of 17, Artemis told his family he planned to hitchhike to California with a group of friends. His father objected, but his mother supported the idea, hoping that he would fulfill his dream of seeing the Pacific coast. Artemis promised to stay in touch, and for a time, he did. He sent letters home and occasionally requested money, which his parents wired to him. After that, contact became sporadic. The family grew concerned, but there was little that they could do. Artemis had vanished into the vastness of the country, and they had no way of knowing where he had gone. The use of a false name raised questions. Was he hiding from someone? Was he involved in something he didn't want traced back to his family? The answers were never found. At least now the man who had checked into room 1046 under a false name had been identified, but the revelation raised more questions than it answered. Why had he traveled so far under a fake alias? What had brought him to Kansas City? Who was Dawn? In the months following Artemis Ogletree's death, his mother Ruby began receiving letters that appeared to be from her son, the first arriving in spring of 1935, several weeks after he had already died in Kansas City. It was typewritten, which struck her as odd. Artemis had never used a typewriter before. The tone was unfamiliar, and the slang didn't match the way he normally spoke. More letters followed, each typed, claiming that he was traveling abroad. One said that he was in Chicago attending business school. Another claimed he was sailing to Europe. Then, in August of that year, Ruby received a phone call from a man who identified himself as Jordan. He said he was a friend of Artemis and claimed that Artemis had saved his life in a fight. According to the caller, Artemis had married a wealthy woman and was now living in Cairo, Egypt. He added that Artemis could no longer write because he had lost a thumb in that same fight. Ruby was disturbed by the call. The man spoke erratically but seemed to know personal details about her son. She contacted the FBI and the American Consulate in Cairo, but no records showed that Artemis had ever traveled there. Unbeknownst to Ruby, at this time, her son was already dead. The letters and the phone call only deepened the mystery. They were sent months after Artemis had died, and whoever wrote or called seemed intent on convincing his family that he was alive and well. The investigators tried to trace the origins of the letters and identify the caller, but no definitive answers were found. The question remained: who was behind the messages, and why was there such lengths gone through to keep a dead man's story alive? Kansas City in the 1930s was a hotbed of organized crime, corruption, and violence. The city's underworld was deeply entrenched, with mob figures operating openly thanks to protection from corrupt officials. Political boss Tom Pendergast ran the city like a machine, and under his influence, law enforcement often turned a blind eye to criminal enterprises. Gambling, bootlegging, and racketeering thrived, and the city became a strategic hub for criminal networks, moving goods and money across the Midwest. This backdrop makes the theory that Artemis Ogletree was caught up in organized crime more than plausible. He arrived in Kansas City under an alias with no luggage and minimal contact with others, suggesting he was either hiding or on a mission. Hotel staff at the President Hotel noted his strange behavior. He rarely left his room, received cryptic phone calls, and was visited by men in suits. These details aligned with the profile of someone who was involved in covert dealings, possibly as a courier or informant. The name Dawn, found in notes and overheard during phone calls, is especially telling. In mob circles, Dawn isn't just a name, it's a title. It implies a figure of authority, someone who commands respect and fear. If Ogletree had crossed such a person or failed in a task, the consequences could have been fatal. The nature of his murder supports this theory. He was tortured, stabbed, and strangled with cords. This wasn't a robbery or a random act. It was methodical, brutal, and symbolic. Mob hits often serve as a warning, and Ogletree's death bore the hallmarks of a message being sent. Kansas City Massacre of 1933, just 2 years prior, had already shown how violent and brazen organized crime could be in the city. That event, in which 4 law enforcement officers and a prisoner were gunned down at Union Station during a botched rescue attempt by gang members, shocked the nation and led major reforms in federal law enforcement. But it also underscored how deeply embedded criminal networks were in Kansas City. If Ogletree had any connections to these circles, whether as a low-level operative or someone who knew too much, his murder could have been a silencing tactic. The aftermath of Ogletree's death also supports this theory. The letters and phone call to his mother claiming he was alive and living in Cairo may have been part of a deliberate misinformation campaign. If someone wanted to keep Ruby Ogletree from asking questions or to delay investigations, feeding her false hope would have been an effective strategy. The caller, who claimed Artemis had lost a thumb and married a wealthy woman, knew personal details that suggested inside knowledge. But no records ever confirmed Artemis had traveled abroad, and the FBI found no trace of him in Cairo. Taken together, the crime-ridden environment of Kansas City, the calculated nature of Ogletree's murder, and the strange communications after his death all point towards a scenario where organized crime played a central role. Whether he was a pawn, a threat, or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, the theory of a mob hit remains one of the most compelling explanations for what happened in room 1046. In the wake of Artemis Ogletree's murder, the case grew colder with every passing lead. The hotel room had been wiped clean from any identifying evidence. Witnesses remembered cryptic exchanges, strange phone calls, and unexplained visits, but none of it added up. It wasn't just the nature of the crime that troubled investigators. It was the layers of intentional misdirection surrounding it. Months after Ogletree was confirmed dead, his mother began receiving typewritten letters claiming her son was alive and traveling abroad. The timing of these communications and the lack of any supporting documentation raised suspicions, not of simple impersonation, but of something deeper, more systematic. The possibility that Ogletree was involved in covert operations or espionage quietly surfaced among those trying to make sense of the bizarre aftermath. While there was no official record of Ogletree having ties to intelligence agencies, His movements and behavior pointed to somebody operating under secrecy, traveling under a false name without luggage, avoiding attention, and staying in a hotel room where conversations were held in hushed tones. These were not the actions of a casual visitor to Kansas City. In the early 1930s, intelligent operations were expanding, especially in regions like Europe and the Middle East. Cairo, in particular, was a hub for both British and American strategic interests. If Ogletree had been recruited into such work, either formally or as a coerced participant, it could explain the odd pattern of his travels and the efforts to keep his family misinformed. The anonymous phone call to Ruby Ogletree from a man claiming her son was living in Egypt, that he had lost a thumb and couldn't write, and that he had married into wealth seemed too elaborate to be a hoax. The caller had knowledge of personal details and appeared to be carefully constructing a narrative. But with no government documentation, travel logs, or passport records indicating any journey overseas, it's not possible to verify this tale. Ogletree's behavior at the President Hotel was consistent with someone hiding in plain sight. The choice to remain in near darkness, only take selective calls, and meet with unknown individuals suggest an effort to stay off the radar. The mysterious note referencing Dawn, whose identity has never been confirmed, could have been related to a code name or a handler. The message itself was brief and logistic, not emotional. Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes, wait. It resembled field communication more than casual correspondence. The brutality of Ogletree's death complicates the espionage theory. Torture and strangulation suggest punishment, perhaps for betrayal or failure in a mission. If he had been working for an agency or organization and breached protocol, the violent outcome could have been the consequence. It's also possible that he was caught between competing interests: criminal, government, or both. Ultimately, the espionage theory remains speculative but compelling. It fills in the gaps that no other narrative fully explains: the alias, the secretive behavior, the sophisticated attempts to redirect his mother, and the absence of any clear motive for his killing. In a time when communication was slower and documentation limited, a person like Ogletree could vanish into the folds of international intrigue without leaving a trail. Whether he was a willing participant or an expendable asset, his final days suggest that he was part of something larger than anyone ever imagined. There is something raw and unnerving about the idea that Artemis Ogletree may have been killed by someone who loved him. Not for money, not for revenge rooted in business or criminal dealings, but because of heartbreak, because emotions boiled over. This theory hinges on the presence of the mysterious woman seen wandering the 10th floor. She wasn't just some lost guest. She was looking for someone, possibly Ogletree. The detail that she asked for his room but didn't go up, that reads like hesitation, or recognized that she wasn't ready for confrontation she came for. Maybe she couldn't go through with it, or maybe someone got there first. Then, of course, there's the matter of the voices. Heated, emotional. Witnesses reported both male and female voices arguing. The kind of fight that sounds personal, not business, not strangers. Something about those sounds made people uneasy. It felt private and volatile. Whoever attacked Ogletree didn't just hurt him, they erased him. His personal items disappeared. Even the hotel-issued towels and soaps were taken, like someone wanted to scrub the scene clean of every trace of his existence. The kind of detail feels obsessive, not professional. Maybe she loved him. Maybe he broke her heart. Maybe she walked out and left for someone else. Maybe another jealous party to take over. And then there's Louise, if that was her real name. Louise remains one of the most enigmatic figures in the Ogletree case. Her name only appeared once, on a funeral bouquet sent anonymously to the cemetery where Ogletree was buried. Love forever. It's such a haunting phrase on a funeral bouquet for a man whose death no one claimed. That card wasn't left by a stranger. It came from someone emotionally entangled. The gesture itself was intimate. Whether it was an expression of guilt, grief, or vindication, we'll never know. But the silence that followed speaks volumes. This theory doesn't need hard proof. It's the absence of it that makes it compelling. No fingerprints, no clear motive, just emotion swept through every fragmented detail. The theory of an unknown accomplice or stranger hinges on a chilling encounter reported by Robert Lane. A few nights before Ogletree was found brutally beaten, Lang had picked up Ogletree and dropped him off in front of the hotel. During the brief drive, the man made a disturbing comment. He said, "I'll kill someone tomorrow." Lane didn't know what to make of it. The man didn't elaborate, and the conversation ended there. He asked to be dropped off at a location near the hotel president where Ogletree was staying. This moment fueled speculation that Ogletree may have been involved in something dangerous. If the man Lane picked up was Ogletree, it raised two possibilities. Either Ogletree was planning to confront someone, or he was already being hunted. The wound on his arm could have come from an earlier altercation. The statement about killing someone might have been a threat, a warning, or even a desperate attempt to express fear. But then again, there is the possibility that this man wasn't Ogletree at all, but someone connected to him. If so, then the theory shifts. It suggests that Ogletree was being followed or manipulated by someone with a violent nature. The fact that Lane's account was never fully verified adds to the mystery. No one knows for sure who the man was, why he was injured, or what he meant by his words. This theory doesn't rely on emotional motives like jealousy or betrayal. It points to something colder, a stranger, a plan, possibly a threat that was already in motion. And then it leaves behind a question that's never been answered. Was Ogletree the hunter or the hunted? Of course, it's entirely possible that Ogletree had been suffering from mental illnesses and staged elements of the crime scene, though it remains one of the least supported explanations. It suggests that Ogletree, possibly grappling with psychological distress, orchestrated parts of the scene himself, perhaps as a cry for help, or in a moment of severe mental breakdown. Supporters of this theory point to his strange behavior during his stay. He kept the room dark, spoke in hushed tones, and appeared visibly anxious. He asked hotel staff to leave the door unlocked and claimed he was expecting someone, and seemed withdrawn. These details could have been interpreted as signs of paranoia or emotional instability. But the theory begins to unravel when physical evidence is considered. Ogletree's injuries were extensive and brutal. He was found bound with cords at the wrist, ankles, and neck. His skull was fractured, and he had been stabbed multiple times. Blood was spattered across the walls and ceiling. These were not superficial wounds or symbolic gestures. They were life-threatening and inflicted with force. There's also the matter of the second voice. A maid reported hearing a rough male voice inside the room when she tried to deliver towels. The voice told her that they didn't need any, even though the room had none. This detail suggests that Ogletree wasn't alone. If he had staged the scene, it would mean that he had help, or that someone else was involved in a way that contradicts the idea of a solitary breakdown. Finally, Ogletree's own statements complicate the theory. When asked who had done this, he replied nobody and claimed he had fallen. This could be interpreted as denial, confusion, or even an attempt to protect someone, but it doesn't align with the level of violence or the presence of another person. In the end, while mental illness might explain some of Ogletree's behaviors, it doesn't account for the physical evidence or the witness accounts. The theory remains speculative, overshadowed by more plausible scenarios involving outside involvement. Anonymous gestures following Ogletree's death have kept the mystery alive long after the crime scene was cleaned. There was no family who came forward, and so the body was said to be buried in a potter's field. When a call came into the funeral home, the voice on the line was calm, deliberate. The caller said that they would pay for a proper burial. They gave instructions for the cemetery and added that Ogletree would be near my sister. Then came the unsettling remark, he got into a jam. No name was ever given, and no one ever came to the funeral. Shortly after, a florist received a phone call, an order for a bouquet of roses. The payment arrived by mail, along with a card that read, "Love Forever Louise." No one named Louise was ever identified. The detectives working in the case were the only attendees at the burial. Whoever sent the flowers and paid for the funeral clearly knew Ogletree, or at least felt strong enough to honor him in death. But they never stepped forward. Years later, a librarian at the Kansas City Public Library received a phone call from someone out of state. The caller said that they had been helping clean out belongings of a recently deceased elderly person. In the process, they had found a box, and inside were newspaper clippings about Ogletree's murder, and an item that had been mentioned repeatedly in the stories. The caller refused to say what the item was. They didn't give a name, and they never called back. This detail, the box, the clippings, the unnamed items, suggests that someone close to the case held onto it for decades, whether out of guilt, obsession, or unresolved guilt. They kept the story alive in private, and when they died, the trail went cold again. When the last shovel of earth covered Artemis Ogletree's grave, silence didn't bury the truth, it multiplied it. Behind every quiet hallway, misdialed room number, vanished soap bar, and anonymous bouquet of flowers, there lingers a presence. Someone once stood over his body and whispered regrets or retribution. Someone kept clippings in a box for a decade, guarding a secret too heavy to name. The room, 1046. The door to it never really closed. Not to memory, not to possibilities. If you find yourself in a quiet corridor with doors slightly ajar, listen carefully. If a stranger speaks and then disappears, remember every word. And if you come across a forgotten box tucked behind old newspaper stacks, don't open it unless you're ready. Mysteries don't sleep. They watch. Let the shadows ask the questions. Let the silence be your clue. And let the mysteries guide your steps. This is Amanda Joy. Love forever.